My name is Caroline, but everyone calls me Carrie, and I'm 59 years old. I've always thought of myself as steady, dependable, the one who makes sure birthdays are remembered and meals are on the table when family gathers. But one night, in a room full of people I loved, I was stripped of that identity with a single word. It was my son's party, a warm autumn evening with fairy lights strung across the garden and music humming in the background. I stood near the buffet table, helping refill the dishes, when my daughter-in-law raised her glass and laughed. "Oh, don't worry about Carrie," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She's practically invisible." The room rippled with uneasy chuckles, eyes darting away from mine. I felt the blood rush to my face, my hands trembling as I clutched the serving spoon. Invisible. As if I were a shadow, a figure that moved and served but didn't matter. I smiled tightly, swallowing the sting, pretending the jab didn't pierce me. Inside, though, something cracked. Shame burned in my chest, but behind it, anger began to rise. A deep, quiet anger I hadn't felt in years. I told myself, right there in that moment, that I would not forget her words. Because sometimes when people think you're invisible, they forget that you're also listening. And what I heard and what I later uncovered would change everything. Mornings in my house have always started the same way. I wake up early, long before the sun looks over the rooftops, and shuffle into the kitchen in my slippers. The kettle goes on, and the smell of strong coffee fills the air. I sit by the window with my mug, watching the sparrows fuss over the feeders I keep hanging from the apple tree. Those quiet minutes are my anchor. The world feels calm, safe, and I can almost believe that my life is exactly as it should be. After coffee, I usually slip into the garden, pulling on my gloves to tend the roses, trim back the lavender, or water the tomatoes in their pots. It isn't much, just a small patch, but it gives me peace. Neighbors walking their dogs often stop for a chat. I'm the one who remembers their grandchildren's names, who offers a jar of jam or a cutting from my plants. People wave at me, smile, sometimes call me the heart of the street. It sounds warm, but it's also a reminder I'm useful, reliable, always there, yet rarely truly seen. My son, Matthew, is the center of my heart. He's 34 now, married to Emma, my daughter-in-law, and they have 2 little ones, Ellie and Jack. Those children light up my days. I babysit when I'm asked, bake cookies for them, and never miss a school play. They run into my arms with squeals of "Gran," and for those moments, I feel visible, important. Still, my role in their household is carefully controlled. Emma likes to remind me, sometimes with a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes, that she is the mother, the decision-maker, the one in charge. I've learned to nod, to step back, to swallow the sting. At family gatherings, when I try to join in a conversation, she has a way of speaking over me or steering the topic elsewhere. Little digs, "Oh, Carrie, you wouldn't understand. Times are different now," slip out as if they're harmless, but they land with weight. On my coffee table at home sits a worn, leather-bound photo album. It isn't fancy, but it holds my life within its pages. My wedding day, Matthew's first steps, holidays at the seaside, birthdays with cakes I'd baked from scratch. Every wrinkle in those photographs tells a story. Every smile reminds me that I mattered, that I still matter. Guests often flip through it, remarking on how much love is captured there. For me, it's proof that I wasn't invisible then, even if I sometimes feel overlooked now. I've always been the one who keeps things running behind the scenes. Sunday dinners? I cook. Birthdays? I bake. School uniforms? I mend. When neighbors are unwell, I'm the one dropping off soup. If the church needs volunteers, my name is on the list. People count on me, but in a way that blends me into the background. Dependable, yes, but rarely celebrated. That night at the party, when Emma called me invisible, it wasn't the first time I'd felt erased. There had been so many smaller moments, scattered over the years, that chipped away at me. The time she introduced me to her friends, not as Matthew's mother, but as just the babysitter. The way she rolled her eyes when I tried to share a recipe. The conversations she had with my son, where my opinions were brushed aside as old-fashioned. I told myself again and again that it didn't matter. That keeping peace in the family was more important than my pride. But deep down, I knew. Each subtle dismissal, Each passing slight was a warning. Emma wanted me to stay in my place, to keep my head down, to accept being overlooked. And for a long time, I did. But life has a way of turning the smallest symbols into weapons of truth. That photo album, the one sitting on my coffee table, would later become more than just a book of memories. It would become the very thing that proved I wasn't invisible at all. I didn't know it then, as I sipped my coffee and tended my roses, as I helped neighbors and tucked my grandchildren into bed after story time. I didn't realize that the simple rhythm of my life was quietly preparing me for a storm. Looking back now, I see the threads clearly, the digs, the laughter at my expense, the way Emma's voice cut sharper each time she diminished me. That party wasn't the beginning. It was simply the moment the mask slipped, the moment she showed me openly what she had been thinking all along. And though I pretended not to care, though I smiled and busied my hands at the buffet table, I carried those words with me like a scar. Invisible. But I wasn't. And soon enough, the truth would make that clear to everyone. The night of the party is etched into my memory with painful clarity. Matthew and Emma had decided to host a gathering in their garden, a late autumn celebration before the evenings turned too cold. Fairy lights glowed across the hedges, music played softly from speakers, and the scent of roasted meats and garlic bread floated through the air. Laughter rolled in waves across the lawn as neighbors and friends mingled, glasses clinking together in toasts. I had dressed carefully, choosing a navy dress I'd saved for special occasions. I even pinned on the silver brooch my mother gave me years ago, a little reminder that I was part of a line of women who mattered. I positioned myself near the buffet table, doing what I always did, making sure platters stayed full, napkins were stacked, glasses replenished. It wasn't asked of me, but it was instinct. If things ran smoothly, everyone else could enjoy themselves. I was refilling a tray of bruschetta when it happened. Emma, radiant in her red dress, raised her glass to propose a toast. Her voice carried easily across the garden. "Here's to family," she said, beaming, "and to friends who make life bright." People cheered, glasses lifted. Then she laughed lightly, adding, "And don't worry about Carrie, she's practically invisible, always buzzing around in the background, keeping things together." The words landed like a stone dropped into water, sending ripples through the crowd. A few chuckled politely, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. Others looked away, fiddling with their glasses, avoiding my eyes. I felt the heat rush to my cheeks, my throat tightening as if I'd swallowed something sharp, invisible. I gripped the serving spoon so tightly my knuckles turned white. My first instinct was to shrink, to let the moment pass, to pretend I hadn't heard it. But every syllable echoed in my chest. Invisible. As if my decades of love, my sacrifices, my place in that family were reduced to nothing more than a shadow. Matthew glanced at me briefly, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, but he didn't speak. Instead, he shifted his weight, gave Emma's hand a squeeze, and smiled weakly as if urging the night forward. The music started again, and conversation resumed, but the air around me had changed. I stood there, plastering a small smile across my face, my dignity hanging by a thread. Inside, though, I was breaking. The shame was raw, searing, like standing under a spotlight while everyone else turned away. I wanted to vanish, to flee into the night. But alongside the shame, anger stirred, a deep, steady anger that told me not to forget. I cleared my throat, busied my hands with the food, and forced myself to keep moving. No one would see me crumble. Not Emma, not the neighbors, not even my own son. My silence in that moment was not weakness. It was armor. As the night wore on, I drifted through the garden, smiling when spoken to, nodding when required, but inside I replayed the moment again and again. Invisible. She had said it casually, like a joke, but her eyes had glimmered with something sharper, something deliberate. It wasn't an offhand remark, it was a statement. I stood under the fairy lights, the chill of the night brushing my skin, and made a vow to myself. I wouldn't challenge her now, not in front of the crowd, not while the children were playing under the table and the laughter tried to drown out the sting. But I would remember. I would remember the taste of humiliation, the weight of silence, the way everyone turned away. And I would carry that memory with me, waiting for the moment when truth would find its voice. Because invisible or not, I had heard her. And what came next would prove she underestimated me. After the party, I carried Emma's words home with me like a bruise no one else could see. I made my coffee as usual, sat by the window, watched the sparrows. Outwardly, everything remained the same. But inside, something had shifted. The word invisible followed me into each quiet corner of my day, and I found myself listening more closely, noticing things I had ignored before. It started with Mrs. Turner, my neighbor from across the street. She stopped me one morning while I was trimming the roses. She leaned in a little closer than usual and whispered, "I heard something about your Emma at the market." "You didn't hear it from me, of course." Her voice lowered further. "They say she's been desperate to keep certain things quiet, financial things." I brushed it off politely, thanking her with a smile, but my stomach tightened. Gossip spreads easily in our community. I've never been one to chase it. Still, the way she said it, with that knowing look, lodged itself in my mind. A few days later, I was at Matthew and Emma's house, watching the children while they attended some dinner. The kids were asleep upstairs, the television low in the background, when the phone rang. I reached for it instinctively, but the answering machine picked up before I could. A man's voice came through, urgent and clipped. "Emma, we need to talk. This can't stay hidden much longer. Call me back immediately." Then the line went dead. I sat frozen, heart thudding. When they returned later that night, Emma was unusually flustered, coat slipping from her shoulders, cheeks flushed. She snatched up the phone, checked the messages, and her face stiffened when she heard the man's voice. Without a word, she deleted it. Matthew didn't notice. He was busy telling me how grateful he was for the babysitting, kissing the children's foreheads before bed. Emma caught my eye briefly, her smile tight, her voice overly cheerful as she thanked me. From then on, I began to see her urgency everywhere. She polished her image like it was made of glass, fragile but desperately on display. Her Instagram filled with pictures of perfect family dinners, expensive dresses, charity luncheons. At church, she lingered a little too long near the women with influence, laughing a little too loud at their jokes. She spoke often of appearances, of keeping up standards, as if life were a stage she couldn't afford to stumble on. I didn't say anything, not to Matthew, not to anyone. Instead, I began to watch, quietly collecting fragments. At a school event, I overheard two mothers whispering about Emma's situation. Their voices dropped when they saw me, but the glance they exchanged told me enough. Something was bubbling beneath the surface, something Emma was desperate to conceal. The more I noticed, the more conflicted I became. Part of me was still raw from the humiliation at the party, craving some measure of justice. Another part of me, the mother, the grandmother, worried about what the truth might do to Matthew and the children. I spent long nights staring at the ceiling, torn between silence and the urge to understand. My emotions swung like a pendulum. Some days, I told myself to leave it alone. People make mistakes, and families survive by swallowing certain truths. Other days, I felt a surge of anger, remembering the smug way Emma had called me invisible, confident I was harmless. That anger whispered, "You have a right to know. You have a right to see the full picture." And so, without meaning to, I became an investigator of sorts. I began paying attention to the small details. The envelopes Emma rushed to hide, the hushed phone calls she took in the garden, the way her smile faltered whenever certain names were mentioned. It wasn't dramatic. There were no midnight searches or confrontations. Just me, a quiet woman in her late 50s, listening more closely, watching more carefully, collecting the puzzle pieces one by one. I realized something important during those weeks. Invisibility can be a shield. Emma thought I blended into the background, that I was too old, too quiet, too harmless to notice what swirled around me. But that very invisibility gave me access. People spoke freely around me. They dismissed me, overlooked me, forgetting I had ears, eyes, memory. The whispers grew louder. The urgency in Emma's voice sharpened, and I knew, though I didn't yet have the whole picture, that a truth was waiting to be uncovered. A truth she wanted buried, and when it finally came to light, it would change everything. It happened on a quiet Saturday afternoon. I had gone to Matthew and Emma's house to drop off a tin of shortbread for the children. They weren't home yet, but I had a key. They often asked me to feed the cat or water the plants if they were running late. I stepped inside, placed the tin on the counter, and was about to leave when I noticed a pile of papers stacked carelessly on the dining table. It wasn't in my nature to snoop. I've always respected boundaries. But something about the scattered envelopes and folders caught my attention. A corner of one document peeked out from beneath a magazine, the paper stamped with an official-looking seal. My hand hesitated before pulling it free, but curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, got the better of me. It was a letter. Old, judging by the creases, but the words were sharp enough to sting. Addressed to Emma, it came from a financial firm I didn't recognize. The letter spoke of unresolved debts, breach of agreement, and a warning that legal action would follow if certain funds weren't returned. I sat down heavily in one of their dining chairs, the letter trembling in my hands. My eyes scanned it again and again. Debt? Legal action? None of this fit with the polished, perfect image Emma worked so hard to maintain. The letter didn't give every detail, but it was enough to suggest a scandal, something damaging, something that could unravel the very reputation she paraded around town. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my heart pounding. A part of me wanted to march straight to Matthew, show him, and finally wipe that smug look off Emma's face. But another part of me urged caution. The letter was old. I didn't know the full story. To act rashly could wound my son, tear apart my grandchildren's home. So I folded the letter carefully and slid it back under the magazine, exactly as I'd found it. My hands shook as I wiped the table, leaving no trace that I had touched it. I locked the door behind me, walked home, and poured myself a stiff cup of tea, though it did little to steady me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, the letter replaying in my mind, the language of scandal whispering through the dark. Breach. Debt. Legal action. Each word was a thread in a web I hadn't yet seen in full. I realized then that I was holding something powerful, even if only in memory. I didn't yet know where it would lead, but I knew this: Emma's perfection was a facade. She wasn't untouchable. And the very woman who had called me invisible was now vulnerable in a way she didn't imagine I would ever discover. I told myself to wait. To gather more before I spoke. To stay silent. For now. But silence felt different this time. Not the silence of humiliation. Not the silence of being erased. This was a silence of choice, of patience, of knowing that the truth would come in its own time. And when it did, the impact would be far greater than a passing insult at a party. In the weeks after I found that letter, Emma's arrogance only seemed to grow. It was as if she were daring the world to challenge her, daring anyone to look beneath the polished surface she had built. She carried herself like the queen of every room, head high, voice loud, laughter ringing out in ways that demanded attention. At church gatherings, she would glide between conversations, making sure to be seen by the right people. She spoke about charity projects she was supposedly leading, dropping hints about the exclusive invitations she received to social events. When the vicar mentioned the food drive, she put her hand on his arm and said sweetly, "Of course, I'll organize the donations, and Carrie can handle the little details. She's good at that sort of thing." Her tone made it clear I was the background worker, the shadow, never the face. At family dinners, her comments became sharper. Once, while passing the potatoes, she looked at Matthew and said, "Your mum means well, but she really doesn't understand how things are done these days." Another time, when I complimented her on the children's new clothes, she smirked and said, "Yes, Carrie, I do like to dress them nicely. I think it's important they don't look dated." Each remark was a needle prick, small enough to dismiss but painful all the same. And though I smiled, nodding as though unbothered, inside I was tightening my grip on what I knew. The letter burned in my memory. I never mentioned it to a soul, but it sat with me like a stone in my pocket. Every time Emma dismissed me, every time she flaunted her standing, I felt its weight. I knew something she didn't know I knew. And that knowledge gave me a strange kind of power. Still, the tension was unbearable. At times, I wanted to shout the truth across the dinner table, to rip through her facade and let everyone see the cracks. But then I would look at Matthew's face, the children's laughter, and I would hesitate. What would happen to them if I exposed everything too soon? What if I was wrong about the details? What if the fallout destroyed more than just Emma's reputation? So I stayed quiet, carrying my secret like a hidden weapon. The world around me seemed to hum with irony. At a neighborhood luncheon, I overheard Emma bragging about her impeccable credit and how she and Matthew were considering buying a holiday home. She spoke as if her life were spotless, her future unshakable. I bit my tongue so hard it nearly bled, resisting the urge to laugh. Impeccable credit, if only they knew. At another family gathering, when Emma dismissed me again with a sly remark, I caught Matthew's eye. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the digs, but said nothing. I realized then that he had grown used to it, conditioned to accept Emma's dominance in their household. My heart ached for him, for the boy who used to run into my arms for comfort, now silent in the shadow of his wife's control. There were nights I paced my living room, torn apart by indecision. The photo album sat on the coffee table, its pages open like a silent witness. Each picture reminded me of the life I had built, the love I had given, the truth of who I was, not invisible, not useless, a mother, a grandmother, a woman with a history that mattered. And yet, in Emma's presence, I was reduced to nothing more than a servant. I asked myself over and over, should I expose her now? Should I show Matthew the letter, let him see who she really was? Or should I wait, hold my silence until the right moment revealed itself? The battle inside me was relentless. Curiosity gnawed at me. What was the full story behind that letter? Hurt pulled me toward revenge, a desire to make her feel the sting she had inflicted on me. But justice told me to be patient. To wait for the truth to reveal itself fully, not half-baked. So, I waited. I smiled at gatherings, accepted the dismissals, and tucked my anger into the corners of my heart. But under the surface, the tension simmered, hotter each day. Because Emma thought she had silenced me, she thought I was invisible. But what she didn't know was that invisibility has its advantages. It lets you see what others overlook. It lets you hear what others hide. And I was listening. I was waiting. And I knew, with every dig, every arrogant laugh, that the moment was coming when silence would no longer be my shield, but my sword. The night of the charity gala arrived like a storm cloud rolling in on the horizon. For weeks, Emma had been buzzing about it, the event of the season, the one that would cement her place among the town's most respected. She had bought a shimmering silver gown that seemed designed to blind the rest of us, her hair styled in a sleek knot that spoke of control and power. Matthew and I simply must be there, she had said more than once, her voice dripping with self-importance. Everyone who matters will be watching. And she was right. The ballroom was filled with people, city officials, wealthy donors, prominent families. A string quartet played softly in the corner, chandeliers casting golden light over rows of glittering tables. It was the kind of room where appearances meant everything, and where a single whisper could destroy a reputation. I had been invited, though I knew it wasn't Emma's idea. Matthew had insisted, and she couldn't very well refuse without raising eyebrows. So I dressed simply, in a navy blue dress with a pearl necklace my late husband had once given me. I wasn't there to dazzle, I was there to observe. And, as it turned out, to be noticed in a way I never expected. The first sign of trouble came as I stood near the refreshment table, sipping water. I overheard two women whispering, their heads tilted toward one another. "They say Emma's past isn't what it seems," one murmured. "I heard something about money, a scandal perhaps," the other replied, eyes darting toward Emma, who laughed loudly across the room. My heart thudded. The gossip had surfaced. The shadows I had glimpsed in that letter were beginning to stretch into the open. As the evening went on, the whispers grew louder. I caught snatches of conversation near the coat check, at the dessert table, even at our own dinner table. Emma noticed too. I saw it in the way her smile stiffened, her eyes scanning nervously, her laugh pitched too high. She was losing her grip, and she knew it. Finally, during the speeches, it happened. Emma was called to the stage to thank donors for their generosity. She stood tall, microphone in hand, her silver gown gleaming under the lights. But as she began to speak, a voice rang out from the crowd. Funny, isn't it? Hearing her talk about financial responsibility when she couldn't even keep her own record clean. Gasps rippled through the room. Emma froze, her knuckles whitening around the microphone. She tried to recover, but the tension was too thick. People were already murmuring, exchanging looks. The whispers had turned into open questions. Her eyes searched the room desperately, and for the first time in years, she looked small, vulnerable. And then, unbelievably, her gaze landed on me. It was almost laughable. The woman who had called me invisible now looked to me as if I were her lifeline. And in a way, I was. I could let her drown in humiliation, or I could step forward. I rose slowly, feeling every eye turn toward me. My heart pounded, but I walked to the front of the room, carrying with me two things I had brought, though I hadn't been sure if I'd use them, the photo album and the letter. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady, stronger than I expected. "I believe I can shed some light here." The room hushed. Emma's face paled. I placed the photo album on the podium first. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carrie. I've been part of this family for a long time. And while I don't often take center stage, I do keep records of our lives, our stories, our truths." I opened the album, showing pictures of birthdays, weddings, community events, faces filled with love and laughter. These are reminders that appearances are only part of the story. Real value is found in what we contribute, quietly, consistently, even when no one is looking. The audience leaned closer. Emma fidgeted beside me, her smile cracking. Then I pulled out the letter. And as for the whispers tonight, I held it up, my voice calm but firm. Yes, there was a financial scandal in Emma's past. A matter she has worked hard to bury. The details are not mine to embellish. The letter speaks for itself. What I will say is this: lies and manipulation can only hold for so long. Eventually, the truth rises. Gasps spread through the room. Emma's face crumpled. She reached for the microphone, stammering, This is taken out of context." But the damage was done. The letter had cracked her perfect facade wide open. People who had once clung to her words now looked at her with doubt, even disdain. And then, something remarkable happened. One of the donors turned to me and said, "Carrie, thank you for speaking plainly. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the most weight." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. Not for Emma, for me. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was the most visible person in the room. Emma sank back into her chair, her arrogance shattered, her power dissolved. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My presence was proof enough. The woman who once dismissed me as irrelevant had been forced to rely on me, and in the end, I became the one who defined the truth. As I returned to my seat, Matthew's eyes met mine. There was gratitude there, and something else, recognition. He saw me, truly saw me. And that was worth more than all the applause in the world. The night ended with Emma silent, her reputation crumbling, while I, the once invisible mother, walked out of the ballroom with my head high, finally illuminated in the light she had tried to steal. The days after the gala unfolded like the quiet settling of dust after a storm. Word of what happened spread quickly. People who had once flocked to Emma for her charm and influence began to keep their distance. Invitations dried up. The phone calls she used to boast about, committee meetings, charity luncheons, planning sessions, seemed to vanish overnight. I didn't revel in it. I didn't need to. Her downfall wasn't about vengeance. It was about balance being restored. The woman who had made me feel invisible was now the one slipping into the shadows, ignored in the very circle she once controlled. Matthew came to see me the following Sunday. He brought the children, their little hands clutching cupcakes they had decorated themselves. As they ran into my kitchen, he lingered behind, his eyes softer than I had seen in years. "Mom," he said quietly, "I should have defended you that night at the party. I heard what she said, and I froze. But you handled it better than I ever could have. You reminded me who you are." His words wrapped around me like a long-awaited embrace. For so long, I had wondered if my children even noticed how much I did for them, how much I gave quietly, without asking for recognition. Hearing him acknowledge me, truly see me, was worth more than anything. My grandchildren pulled me to the living room, flipping open the photo album that always sat on my coffee table. They pointed at pictures of birthday cakes and family picnics, asking me to tell the stories again. I realized then that my legacy wasn't about how loud I was or how many people applauded me in public. It was about these small moments, captured and remembered, that wove me into the fabric of their lives. Neighbors, too, began to look at me differently. At the market, Mrs. Johnson from across the street touched my arm and said, "Carrie, you stood with such dignity that night. We were all proud of you." At church, people who had once overlooked me came forward to shake my hand. It wasn't about fame or glory. It was about respect, real, earned respect. Emma, meanwhile, avoided me. I saw her once in town, her shoulders hunched, sunglasses covering half her face. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence between us was its own form of justice. I didn't gloat. I didn't seek revenge. I carried myself as I always had, steady, dependable, present. The difference was that now, people noticed. They saw me not as invisible, but as a woman who had spoken the truth when it mattered most. And in that quiet justice, I found peace. Looking back, I've thought often about that moment when Emma called me invisible in front of a room full of people. The sting of those words hasn't vanished completely, but they've transformed. What once felt like humiliation has become a reminder that silence is not weakness. For years, I believed my role was simply to hold things together quietly, without complaint. I thought being dependable meant being overlooked. But I've learned that there's strength in patience, and even greater strength in choosing the right moment to speak. The photo album on my coffee table reminds me daily that a life's worth isn't measured by who claps the loudest or who shines the brightest at a party. It's measured by the steady presence, the love given, the truth kept alive through the years. Emma thought she could erase me with a single word. Instead, she erased herself. That is the lesson I carry. Dignity can outlast arrogance, and truth will always outshine lies, no matter how polished they appear. So I ask you, as I sit here sharing my story, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent, holding on to your dignity in the shadows? Or would you have spoken out, risking it all to step into the light? Because sometimes, the ones who are called invisible are the very ones who hold the power to change everything.